So welcome to the Quality of Mind Transforming Business podcast. This is where we explore the new game-changing understanding that can unlock new levels of performance, resourcefulness, and well-being in the workplace. Join us if you want to be part of the new breed of leaders in business. Join us if you're fed up with the conventional echo chamber. And join us if you want to be part of the new revolution in understanding how the mind works and recognize that we are more than just our psychology and that can lead to better results.
Hello and welcome to the Quality of Mind Transforming Business podcast series. And today's episode, I have a lovely conversation lined up with a fellow professional in the area of the principles behind quality of mind. He has a really interesting background and is able to make some wonderful comparisons between different aspects of our lives and work. So welcoming Sam Jarman to the show. Sam, welcome. Hello.
Hi, Piers. Thanks for the invite. Looking forward to chatting.
Absolutely. Sam, can you start off by telling listeners a little bit about your background and where you've ended up?
Sure. So my background is as a professional golfer. So I played full-time golf for about 10 years and then got into teaching. So I did my PGA training, became a member of the PGA, Professional Golfers Association. And in my teaching, I was sort of more drawn to the mental side of the game. When I was playing, it was very apparent to me that lots of golfers out there can hit the ball really well, but the difference between those that could make a successful career out of it and those that ended up like me teaching was mainly down to how well they understood their thoughts and feelings when they played. So when I started teaching, I was much more curious about that side of things than I was about the golf swing, and so started learning more about that side of things, and that drew me to the principles that we're going to be talking about today. So I gradually got deeper into that with regards to working with golfers, and then that's led me to working in other sports as well. So I work in cricket, football, rugby. And I also do some work in schools and universities and with organisations as well.
So here we go. We've got something here which you're talking about, something to people which can help their golf swing, help them bowl better balls in cricket, can help kids be better at school and help organisations be better at what they do. And the linking factor, I guess, is the mind.
Indeed. I don't know whether it's the mind. I think it's the understanding of how the mind works, which I'm sure your listeners are well aware of. We use this word mind, and I don't know whether you've sort of defined it previously, but to me, what we're referring to when we talk about the mind is just our thoughts, feelings, perceptions, and sensations, and how those appear to us, and how well we understand what's going on with those will determine how we react to all of those things. And if you don't really understand what's going on, you'll react very differently to our thoughts, feelings, perceptions, and sensations than we will if we understand what's truly going on with how those perceptions, how those thoughts are created, and what they mean, and you know what the impact on us is likely to be with those.
I think it's a great question, because I would have said, if you'd asked me 10 years ago, that mind kind of meant brain. Yeah. I thought they were similar-ish words pointing to the same thing, roughly. Didn't really see a distinction.
Me too.
But now I see a huge distinction between the two. And I think I would absolutely agree with your definition of mind. And I think I'd also add one bit to that, is that there's something in what the word mind that points to what's behind those feelings, thoughts, perceptions, and sensations.
Definitely.
Almost like what's sourcing it.
Yeah.
So it's like a catch-all for that. But I think the biggest thing for me was to go, the brain and the mind are totally different things. And I'd never really thought that before because I just hadn't recognized it. Does that resonate with you?
Absolutely, 100%. I think we probably by the sounds of it, sort of stumbled upon this different understanding, maybe around the same sort of time. And back then, I would have thought the mind, if you like, was an emergent property of the brain, whereas now I see it the opposite way around. The brain is something that is known by the mind. The brain is just the word that we use for the physical object, which we all presume resides between our ears. We've never seen it. We've never, unless you're a brain surgeon, how would I know I've got a brain unless somebody told me I had a brain?
Yes.
That's we talk about the brain as if it's something that is directly experienceable by human beings, but it isn't. I've never knowingly experienced my brain function, just like I've never knowingly experienced my the way my blood is pumped around the body. I'd probably know if it stopped, but actually on a day-to-day basis, I'm not aware of what my brain is or what it's doing. What I am aware of is my experience. And we know that the brain has got something to do with that experience, but that is still in the very early stages in terms of neuroscience of knowing what's actually going on there. And I think I was under the impression that neuroscience had it pretty much all figured out, and now I know that's very, very far from the truth.
And I think let's get into this for a few minutes while we're here on this subject, because I think it's such an interesting distinction. Because I would have thought that the brain was the epicenter of everything about us, and now to understand it's only a bit player, right? I mean, it's an important bit, because if you put an electromagnetic thing next to part of our brain, it will make half our vision black and white, right? So we know it can affect our perceptions, no question about it. It can affect them, but it's not the source of them.
Indeed.
It's not the epicenter that we all thought it was. It's not all coming. I was always taught that metaphor that the brain was like a library or a hard drive.
Yeah.
And everything that you were was sort of in your brain, and the brain saw the world. That's how I was brought up. And now to see that it's part of the process of perception rather than the source is quite a big difference. Now, before we get too hyper scientific or hyper philosophical, when it comes to golf swings and being great in business, do you think it's useful to know about the fact the brain not being the epicenter and the source?
Great question. I think what I've learned most from these principles over the last 10 years is that fundamentally we're at our best when we are allowing ourselves to, in whatever field we're doing, we are allowing ourselves to flow instinctively and intuitively and naturally. And there's a very common phrase in golf, which is we're not getting in our own way. And I'm sure that phrase is applicable to business, to school, to relationships, to all sorts of things. When things are going wrong, it's usually because we're getting in our own way. And when we're at our best, it's just flowing. So the word flow is almost synonymous with sporting excellence. And part of the problem with this idea that the brain, i.e. a physical part of our anatomy, is in charge and in control of elements of our performance is almost the opposite of that, because we start to believe that, look, if the brain gives rise to thoughts, feelings, perceptions, sensations, our state of mind or whatever, then we should be able to control that. And that, unfortunately, it is not our experience. I don't know what my next thought is going to be. I don't know how I'm going to feel in 2 minutes' time. And by, when an athlete is told, look, you should think positively, you shouldn't think about the ball going in the water, or you should visualize success, but then other thoughts crop up, that's then taken, well, what's wrong with me if I can't do that? Because apparently that's what all successful athletes and business people do. They are in control of these thoughts, feelings, emotions, whatever it is. Well, if the model that you describe of the brain being the epicenter and the source of our experience is true, then, well, yeah, that we should be able to do that. But to me, this is the fundamental thing that's wrong with what I would call the psychological approach to performance. Is there is absolutely no evidence, or there isn't even a theory in principle of how subjective experience, i.e., what we're all experiencing right now, arises from the matter, the cells, the subatomic particles that make up a human brain. And this is, neuroscientists have been trying to figure out how consciousness arises from this inert dead stuff called matter for tens of years, probably hundreds of years, and we're not even remotely close to a theory about how it happens. So this problem was referred to by a guy called a philosopher by the name of David Chalmers in 2003. He calls it the hard problem of consciousness. And until science, neuroscience, and psychologists can explain how the brain gives rise to subjective experience, it's almost certain that we're looking at this in completely the wrong way. And trying to control this, i.e., so the physical controls the mental, which is what most people believe is the order that it works in, that's completely the wrong way of looking at it. What we should be looking at it is the other way around, which is mind or the mental side, or mentation is primary, and then matter is part of our experience within our experience. Our experience is mental. All we know are thoughts, feelings, sensations, and perceptions. The brain is known by something. It doesn't know anything. And at the moment that we start to think, hang on a minute, maybe we've got this the wrong way round, all sorts of different possibilities open up in the terms of the way we look at performance. We look at the way we relate to other people. We look at the way we act in the world. And it's so much of the things that are going wrong in both, when things are going wrong in both sport and life, are because of this foundational misunderstanding about how our experience is created.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. And regular listeners would have heard us talk about this before, a fair bit in the idea that we've kind of got it the wrong way around, and there's a primacy of consciousness or source or whatever you want to call it, right? And the implications of that. Although it's fascinating, isn't it, Sam? Because it's quite hard. Someone's just listened to this a little bit fresh and hasn't really heard much about this. They might be going, what? So you're telling me, by me understanding that kind of conventional science has sort of got it wrong, I'm going to get better at my sport or find it easier to navigate the world and life and business. And it's quite hard for people, until they've been there and experienced it, to actually go, well, why will understanding that help me day to day? How do I go from the profound to the practical?
Again, great question. And I think it's so one of my favorite philosophers, modern philosophers, is a guy called Bernardo Kastrup. And he's got this wonderful phrase that he uses, which is that the intellect is the bouncer for the heart. So if your intellect is convinced that the world works in a certain way, even though intuitively, i.e. in your heart, you feel that, hang on, this isn't making sense because I'm doing everything that the experts are telling me I should do and things aren't working. If your intellect won't allow you to drop certain beliefs that you've got about how the world works, it's impossible for you to then go on and experience those fully. So basically what this different understanding of how our experience is created, how the mind works, what reality is, if you want to go that deep with it just opens up a doorway for us to use a different type of intelligence. So rather than always going with what our intellect and what logic and reason are telling us, we can just allow ourselves to go slightly more towards our intuition and our I don't even know the right word for it. Just to be more sensitive to what our heart is telling us rather than what our head is telling us. And most of us will know that, this thing that we've got, this inner wisdom, this gut instinct, when we trust that, often things work out a lot better than when we try to work things out rationally and use logic to determine the best course of action, or how we should think, or how we should feel, or how we should behave.
Yeah. And I think, for me personally, I was so innocently, invisibly self-identified with my, let's just call it the conceptual mind or the intellect, because I'd had, I was very lucky, I had quite a nice education, right? I didn't even really get this difference that, you talked about there being a different type of intelligence. Indeed. Now, of course, I was already doing it because I'm a human being, and we all are, right? But yeah. I never respected it or lent into it or let it run the show. Right. I thought I got by on my smarts and my conceptual understanding of the world. Right. So I never even realized there was a difference. And I think one of the wonderful things is not only does it give you more of a sense of navigating life through a sort of instinctive wisdom based thing, it also helps a couple of other things. I think your day-to-day experience of life just feels better. Right.
Agreed.
So you get more juice from the orange on a day-to-day basis. So the simple things like going outside for a walk, doing the washing up, feel better and nicer. So that's great. Also, I think there's something wonderful that happens around how you don't limit yourself by your imagination.
Yeah.
So a lot of us, particularly people who are slightly disenchanted with the world or disillusioned by what's going on, they've lost their mojo sometimes, it's because when they look down at the next 5-10 years, they just think, well, it's going to be a bit more of the same, isn't it? Right? So they're not getting much juice from the orange, and they're kind of thinking, well, how can things be better unless something dramatically changes on the outside?
Yeah.
And this gets you to see that you can have a better felt experience of what's going on without anything actually changing, and you stop limiting yourself. But I just wasn't really, I didn't clock it. I just had no idea it was available until people very helpfully pointed to me, and I was like, oh, there is a difference. And then and once you start to notice a difference, it becomes really obvious, doesn't it? But
absolutely,
I think the jump for people is trying to go, well, what are they pointing about? Well, what are they talking to? What is this voodoo stuff they're on about?
And the as I say, it's almost that it's hiding in plain sight, isn't it? From the moment that we were able to communicate, we've been educated to believe that our happiness lies in achievement, attainment, and material possessions or material wealth. So, when you're 5, you're told, well, you'll be happy when you get into this school, when you make these friends, and then it goes on. You'll be happy when you get into the next school. Then when you get these exam results, then when you get picked for this team, then when you go to this university, when you find the right partner, when you get the right job, when you get the right relationship, when you have this much money in the bank, when you retire, and we're always making our happiness conditional on something external to us, conditional on the situation or circumstances of our life. And it's no different in sport. We're constantly, when we win something, we feel happy, and we believe that the happiness came from the winning. So, well, then you're on the treadmill, because in order to feel that again, you've got to do it again. And we all know that a sporting life is short, it's finite. And if you're identified, if you believe that who you are is the label of a footballer or a cricketer or an Olympian, an athlete, then that's, what happens when that stops? Who am I? And I think that's the big question that this journey leads us to is that question of who we are at our source. Are we just the labels that society has placed on us through the achievements and the attainments and the doing that we've done, or are we something else? And that exploration for me has been, the most powerful and the most liberating thing that I've ever been lucky enough to uncover. And as I say, I feel very fortunate that my work now is helping other people to explore that for themselves.
Well, let's get into that for a few minutes, because listeners may have also listened to a podcast we did called Self and I, and this is going to back that up. But I know Sam's got a nice way of talking about it, so I kind of know where I'm going with this. So Sam, if someone's listening and went, "What do you mean, who we really are?" Maybe they just clocked that phrase. How would you help them just explore that? Just in 5 minutes now, how would you help someone explore that, who we really are, truly are? What's our true essence? How would you do that?
No problem. So when I say those words, who we really are, what this is the question: who or what am I referring to when I say the words I, or I am, or me? So what is the essence? What am I referring to when I say I or I am? Because most people, and as I say, based on the journey that I've just described there, most people believe themselves to be the central character in the story of Sam, for example. So Sam is born, so therefore he is a body, and he's given a name, and he's given some parameters. So he's a boy or a girl, a man or a woman. He's a certain age, so there's a time frame attached to him. All of these things are who we think of as me. These are essential parts of the story, the character of the story. But it's interesting when we start to question that, and this is a little sort of thought experiment that I do with some of the people that I work with. It's like, well, am I really just the body? That is that who I'm referring to when I say I am? And it's like, well, hang on a minute. I don't say I am a body. I say I have a body. And my body has changed a lot since I was a baby. It's not the same body. I think scientifically there's something to say that the cells in our body are pretty much totally replaced every 6 or 7 years. So it's not the same body that I was born with, yet I still refer to it as to me as I. So I'm probably not referring to the body because the body's changed, but my sense of I, the sense of who I believe myself to be or who I know I am, is the same. It was the same when I was 2 years old. It was the same when I was 10 years old. It was the same when I was 20 years old. It's the same now. I still think of myself as I. And, if I had an accident and lost a hand or lost an arm, I wouldn't feel like I was any less me. My body would have changed in an instant, but I would still be me. I would still feel that I was I. So it seems to me that this identification with the body is an illusion. That's not who I am, in the sense that my body is probably more in the same ontological category as my car or my house. It's kind of where I live. It's what I drive around in. So that sort of gets us away from the idea, well, all I am is the meat suit, the body. And the next thing is, well, what about the labels? Am I something more than the character of the story of my life? Well, the story, as I say, the story has changed. My story has changed massively from when I was 5 years old to I'm 50 this year. So there's a lot gone on in that time. The story has changed. My job has changed. The way that I describe myself to people has changed. The way that people, no doubt, the way that people see me has changed. But I still refer to myself as I. So it seems to me that the I that I'm referring to is not the character. It's what knows the character. It's what's aware of the character. So the what I'm referring to as I is the awareness or the consciousness in which the story takes place. And once you start to explore that and start, even you don't need to believe it. The last thing I want anybody to do that's listening to this is believe what I'm saying. Please go and explore it for yourself. But once you just open up to the possibility that who you really are, who we really are, is not a limited, finite body and mind, but is something much, much deeper, much, much wider, much, much greater, then it opens up all sorts of possibilities for how we live, how we see the world, how we relate to other people, how we perform, and how we live our lives. Because the attachments that we had to those ideas of who we are and to this body, which we all know is going to come to an end at some point, we can start to just question, well, hang on a minute, does this awareness, does this consciousness that I know myself to be, because I can sense it, I know it, well, does that consciousness, that awareness, share the limits and the restrictions of the body and of this mind, which we know are going to end? Are they limited, or are they wider? Are they infinite? That's the question that pretty much every spiritual tradition and every philosophy and every religion has been pointing to over the last 3,000 years. This is the conversation that, to me, is the most important one we can have. It's those three massive questions. Who am I? What is this? So what is this experience that I'm having? What is life? And what should I do in it? What's the purpose? What's the meaning of it? Exploring those three things are the real keys to answering a lot of the smaller, more maybe troubling on a day-to-day basis that a lot of people are struggling with.
And I think people start often with question 3, what should I do in life, without considering questions 1 and 2, and that's what it gets backwards. But and I think it's so fascinating, isn't it? Because it's almost like we know there's something that's continuous about us, right? Yeah. That has been similar when I was 2, 5, 30, 50, that, maybe is the same for everyone. But the mistake we've made is that we think that thing that's continuous is the body mind, right? So the me, the Piers or the Sam, we think, that's the continuous bit. Actually, the bit that is continuous is the thing that's aware of all of that.
Absolutely.
So we've kind of sussed there's something continuous. And it's funny, isn't it? I love the example of deep sleep, right? We'll have a beautiful night's sleep, and and some of that will be dreams and some of that will be deep sleep. And we'll wake up in the morning and we'll say, I had a nice sleep. And what are we referring to when we say, I had a nice sleep? Because actually, for part of that deep sleep, there was no you. There was no time, space, matter.
Exactly.
Right? There was nothing in the content of your personal mind, but something was still there. Yeah. So there wasn't no awareness. There was the awareness of absence, which points to the fact that the continuity isn't the Piers or the Sam or the body or time, space, and matter. It's something else.
Yeah, exactly. And that's it. We all know when you've had a good night's sleep. Well, how could you know that you had a good night's sleep if there was nothing there that was aware of it?
Yeah.
That's to me is as I say, those three questions. You sort of said that the third question. I mean, to me, that's the simplest of the three questions to answer, because if you ask anybody, what do you want most out of life, or what do you want most for your kids or for your family, what do you think they'll say?
They want happiness and well-being, peace of mind.
Exactly. So that's to me is the simplest thing. So the third question, it seems like the biggest one, like, what's the purpose of life? Well, the purpose of life is to be happy. That's it. So once you've got that established, it's like, well, okay, well, what is happiness? Well, to me, happiness is really simple. It's just the absence of seeking or resisting. So when you're happy, you're not looking around for stuff to make you happy. You just are. You're just being. So therefore, happiness is almost our simplest way of existing, in that when we just are, when we're not thinking about the future or the past or what may or may not happen, we're happy. And most people, when I ask them, I say, well, when were you happiest? They'll say, well, when I was a kid. And I'll go, okay, then, well, so happiness, the feeling of happiness, you have experienced it. It's part of your reality. What had you done? What had you achieved? What had you attained? How much money had you got at that point when you were happy? And I go, well, nothing. I just was, I just played. I was just being. And it's like, well, okay, so if you were happy then, what's stopping you from being happy now, apart from the fact that you've placed all these conditions on your own happiness? And that's where we start to get into this whole sort of question of, oh yeah, I can be happy at any moment. I can be happy for no reason. And the main thing that's stopping me from being happy is all these conditions that I'm placing on my own happiness at the behest of this culture and this society that unfortunately we're living in, which has got it arse backwards.
Yeah. And I must admit, I'm Yeah, and this is just semantic now. The word happy for me is slightly sometimes the wrong word. Partly because for about 6-7 years I had a business called Feel Happy Now, right? This is when I was back in the days of NLP, back in 2002, I started that. And I wish now it was called Feel Now rather than Feel Happy Now, because actually when you're talking about the word happy, some people think, well, that just means always being positive and never, never crying if your football team loses or if someone's sad, So we don't mean happy in always positive. We just mean being peaceful in the now, being okay, content.
Being okay, being well within yourself, being, whatever word you use for that underlying feeling of okayness, whether it's happy, peace, love, contentment, well-being, all of those words. Again, if I was a Japanese person or a Chinese person, I'd have a different word. I'd know what that sensation was. I'd know what that feeling was, but I would use a different word for it. Again, we're very limited by our language when we're talking about this stuff, because language itself is a concept, and what we're pointing to is something that's beyond the conceptual. So
absolutely,
when we're talking about this stuff, and I've found this to my cost, is that I have to try and make clear that don't worry about the language, and this is Sid Banks always used to say this: look for the feeling rather than for the words or for the intellectual understanding of it. It's about the feeling. It's not about the intellectual understanding or the.
But I did like one way you described it, which I quite like, which is it's actually when you were talking about happiness, it's the ceasing or the absence of seeking. So actually what we mean by happiness, because you were saying, well, when we were a little kid, we just felt happy. Well, how come? Well, I wasn't trying to seek anything. I wasn't trying to get anywhere. I wasn't trying to achieving. So almost happiness is or peace of mind, what you want to call it, is what happens when everything else drops away.
Yeah.
Including this self-body mind.
Yeah, exactly. When you stop, the key to happiness, one of my favorite sayings is, happiness is it's not getting what you want, it's wanting what you have.
Yes. And let's take that for a moment into flow. So you mentioned flow before.
Yeah.
And you talk to a lot of sports people. So when they're absolutely in it, they're not thinking, am I winning the PGA? Am I back to score the winning try? They're not in that bit. That might come before or after. When they're in absolute flow, there's no seeking going on.
Exactly. There's no seeking because there's no seeker.
Yes. So, and they've lost themselves. They'd even say that, I lost myself in the game.
Yeah. If you, I use this analogy quite a lot, or this story quite a lot. It's like if you're lucky enough to hear a sports person, literally the moment after they've just come off the pitch or after they've just had an amazing performance, and somebody sticks a microphone under their nose and asks them to describe what was going on, most of them will go, I haven't got a clue. I've got no idea.
Yes.
Now, if they get a couple of minutes for the media training to kick in and for their brain, their intellect to create this story about what happened, you'll get a different answer. But straight after, when it's fresh, and I know this from my own experience, and most people will have had this experience for themselves, whether it's in work, whether it's in sport, whether it's in a hobby, whether it's, they're creative, whether they're an artist or a musician or whatever. When you've lost yourself in a particular moment or a particular performance, you've got no idea really what's going on. It's just unfolding. It's almost like you're watching yourself do it. You're not in control of it. It's in control of you. And that's what we love. That's the moment in sport that everybody is looking for. It's not about the winning. It's not about the money. It's not about the trophies. It's not about the, what people say about you in the papers the next day. That moment where you completely lose yourself in the experience is why most people play sport.
I'm going to point to an example of that, which I'm sure you're very familiar with. And I saw it so clearly. Ben Stokes, when he did that amazing last wicket stand. And I think he got 90. Did he get 90 runs or something?
No, he got 100. He got 130 odd, I think it was.
But the last wicket stand was ridiculous.
Yes, yeah.
And someone chucked a microphone under his face about a minute after he came off the pitch.
Right.
And he just was like, he was so still in it.
Yeah.
He couldn't even speak really.
Exactly.
Right? And he then had to think, oh, I better make something up about what. And all he said was, I think he said something like, I just played the ball as it came.
Exactly.
That's what he said.
But it is, it's like you can't describe what you were doing in that moment because you weren't there.
Yes, yeah. And now, just to be clear for people on this, when we say you weren't there, I'm not talking Sam and Piers weren't in the crowd. We're saying Ben Stokes, the cricketer. He wasn't. The self of him wasn't there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
He was just in it.
Yeah.
And he lost himself in it.
Yeah.
And he didn't even think about the score.
Yeah, exactly. And then, you know, the way that we exist is through a narrative. You know, it's almost impossible for a human being to live a life without some sort of narrative. But in those moments of flow, the narrative is suppressed. It's very quiet. It's very calm. But then afterwards, the narrative kicks in, and Ben Stokes will reappear and start telling the story about how he won that game of cricket. That's how it works. But you know, that's always with hindsight, and we're always telling that story, effectively looking in the rearview mirror.
Yes.
So it's, you know, I've got a professional cricketer that I've become very good friends with, that I do some work with, and he won a final for his team, and he said he couldn't remember anything about hitting the winning runs or the catch that he took in the semi-final until he watched it on TV afterwards.
Yeah.
You know, he didn't even know who the bowler was or the batter that he took the catch off. He said, I had no idea. It was just flowing.
It's interesting, because if we make it a little bit about business just for the moment, because I know some people here will be interested in business, it is that, you know, you said it's impossible to exist without a narrative. That's even more prevalent in business, because in sport, you're kind of allowed to lose yourself sometimes, right? That's sort of allowed, particularly if you're performing. Now in business, when great decisions are made, or the business is thriving, or you just had a lovely conversation with a potential customer or supplier, or you have to have a narrative for that, right? It's, you know, and the board meeting conversations are all narrative, right?
I'm not sure. I think we're maybe slightly talking about slightly different things. In the moment, there's no narrative. There might be words being spoken, but I don't know about you, but when I come on a podcast like this, I have no idea what I'm going to say.
No, me neither.
The words are almost out of my mouth before I've realized what I'm saying. Now, usually something coherent comes out, but it's always been the same in sort of, you know, in my business now, which is coaching. You know, I'll say something to a client, and I'm almost like I'm almost surprised sometimes about what I've just said, because I didn't know I was going to say it. It just came to me. I didn't say it came through me, if that makes sense. And I've you know, with a couple of the books that I've written as well, I've written a paragraph and I'm like looking at it going, where the hell did that come from?
Yeah.
I've never had that thought in my life before, and all of a sudden it's appeared on a page in front of me. And it's, I would imagine that's how a lot of decisions get made as well. It's like the decision happens and then the decider appears in the moment afterwards.
That's exactly what I'm referring to, Sam, is that they will have to justify it to their board, their customers, their suppliers, you know, how it happened.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's where the narrative comes in. So
absolutely, 100%. Yeah.
So actually in the moment, they made a beautifully emergent decision, and it actually wasn't even a decision for them, as an obviousness, which then gets retrospectively made into. But because they don't realize that's what's happened, when they want to replicate that, or they want their staff to replicate that, they think that happened because of the amount of information they had, or the amount of business experience they had, or whatever it is, rather than going, oh no, that just came from that, you know, we talked about that different type of intelligence before. You mentioned that. It came through that. And I the funniest little example of that yesterday, I was talking to a client, and he's got potentially a big, you know, curveball coming into one of his business plans, you know, because he's being sued by someone else, and then someone else is doing something else, and there's lots of multiple parties getting in the way. And he said to me, I know I'm going to be okay, but I need more than that right now to help me. Right?
Yeah.
I want
to know that feeling.
Yeah. And I just said, pause, stop. just listen to what you just said. Now, he has a bit of this understanding already. I said, just pause, listen to what you said. You want more than that right now. And who's asking that question?
Exactly.
Right. And he spotted it, right? You get a bit of nudging. He spotted it and went, oh, yeah, I don't actually need more than that. I just think I do.
Exactly. Beautiful.
It's such a beautiful example unfolding in the moment. So,
absolutely.
And I think, you know, to try and make this relevant for people in their everyday life, because some of the stuff that we pointed to is really quite wonderfully profound, is that's how simply it turns up, doesn't it?
Yeah. And again, the biggest form of getting in your own way is thinking it's not that simple. Because we're so addicted to this cleverness, to this intellectual, this conceptualization, that the fact that something can be that simple is it's kind of like, well, the ego doesn't like that, because it's like, well, how am I going to, one, take any credit for that because it's so simple, and two, yeah, that doesn't make me look great.
Yeah.
And if we're, you know, the story of Sam is if I believe that that's who I am, then the more that I can aggrandize that character and increase its worth and increase its value, the better that seems to be. So the fact that I've done something clever and amazing is, and I can tell a really great story about it, well, that's part of that process. But the moment that I see that that's not who I am and that I don't need to do any of that, I open up to the simplicity of an insight just dropping in and going, oh yeah, well, that'll work, and just going with that.
And it takes the grind out of it, you know, it takes the pressure off it.
Totally.
So, you know, a lot of us would think, well, as a responsible business person, I should think about this stuff a lot. It's my duty to think about these, what I perceived in my sensations as big problems a lot, right? And if I didn't do that, I'm not doing my job very well, right? So we think, and that's why I'm paid the big bucks, to think about stuff a lot, to wear that stress on my shoulders almost. And this, you know, what you said about this being too simple, it feels a bit like you're cheating.
Yeah. Well, right? But that's what it feels like when you're at your best on the sports field as well. It's like, if you watch Federer play, and it doesn't look like he's grinding or he's working hard. He's just, it's effortless. And that's what it's like when we, you know, the allowing yourself to look in the direction of effortlessness and look in the direction of simplicity. And unfortunately, again, we're back to our societal and cultural conditioning where, you know, this Protestant work ethic, if you want to call it that, and this you know, we lionize hard work, and it's you know, it breaks my heart when I see a group of kids on a playing field just loving what they're doing, playing with enthusiasm and freedom and creativity and expressing themselves. And then they come off the pitch at the end of the game and the coach goes, well done, guys, you worked really hard today. And I'm just like, you know, that's not what it looked like to me. And I'm absolutely certain that's not what it felt like to the kids, because they were just having a fantastic time. The last thing that was for them is hard work.
Yes.
No wonder we're, you know, these kids, you know, and I've seen it a lot, unfortunately, where, you know, a kid with talent and enthusiasm and creativity gets into one of these sporting organizations, and, you know, 3 years later, they're hating the game because it's become work for them. And it's the single most, you know, it's the single biggest thing that I talk to professional athletes about. It's like, how can I rediscover the joy for this game that I had as a kid? Because I've turned it into drudgery. I've turned it into something I have to do rather than that I love doing. And I'm sure there are people in business that have found that as well, where maybe they, you know, the enthusiasm that they had as a startup, or as, you know, they've found a passion and they followed it and managed to turn it into something that they can earn money from or earn a living from. But then it just becomes, you know, all the complications just suck all the fun out of it, and we turn it into work.
I think it's a really prevalent problem to different degrees in business. I speak to a lot of people. I've lost my mojo. It feels a bit flat. I think actually it's huge. Sam, we've kind of, because I like to keep these relatively short, and it's been such a beautiful conversation, but we might need to do a part 2. I mean, I've
no problem,
super
mate.
enjoyed it. But if there was something you could say to sort of, sum this up, the last parting thoughts for any listener who's like, okay, I'm sort of with you guys, but what next? Well, what would you say as a sort of parting thought?
If it feels like hard work, stop. Just pause for a second, and what you'll find is that you're not seeing it as who you really are. You're seeing it through the eyes of the character in the story. And any time that you feel pressure or stress, or that you're grinding, it's because you're seeing it from the wrong perspective. You've identified with the character, with the ego, with the person that you think you are, rather than the true self. So that would be my takeaway. And it's the thing that I say to all of the athletes that I work with. If it feels like hard work, if you stop enjoying it, press pause and just try and reconnect with what it was that you fell in love with when you started doing it. Yeah, and almost the feeling is the indicator. The rumble you wrote about 100%. That. So the system's telling us that, isn't it? Exactly. It's almost helpfully going, the fact this feels grindy and hard and difficult is a clue that you've forgotten what you truly are. Exactly. And get back to that. Yeah, that's a lovely way to leave it. So, Sam, thank you so much for coming in this conversation. Mate, you're so welcome. Really enjoyed it. Thank you. If people want to get hold of you, can I just put your website and stuff in the show notes and stuff? Yeah, it's sportsprinciples.com is probably the best one of my websites, unless you're a golfer. Otherwise, it's samjarmangolf.com. Brilliant. Well, I'll definitely put that. And it's been beautiful talking to you. So thank you so much for coming on. And everyone else, have fun being curious. See you next time.
If you enjoyed listening to this podcast, please reach out and leave us a review and a comment. If you want more info, check out makingchangework.co.uk or Piers Thurston on LinkedIn.